It started with laughter, wild, infectious laughter that filled the Family Feud studio like sunlight on a winter morning. Two brothers stood behind their podiums, both wearing the same crooked smile, the same dimple on the left cheek, the same nervous sparkle in their eyes. They were the heart of their family, Marcus and Elijah Williams. At first, the game rolled on like any other night. Steve Harvey cracked his jokes, the audience roared, and every question bounced between fun and competition. But beneath Elijah's grin, something fragile was trembling, something even Steve couldn't joke away. Then it happened. Midway through a question about things you can't live without, Elijah pressed the buzzer. His voice broke as he answered, "Family." Simple. Too simple. But the silence that followed wasn't because the answer was bad. It was because of how he said it. Steve squinted, sensing the change in tone. The crowd leaned in. Marcus looked down, his hands shaking. Steve tried to lighten the air. "You all right, man? You look like you just saw your report card." The audience chuckled nervously. Elijah smiled faintly, but it wasn't the kind of smile that stays. Then he whispered something that the microphones barely caught. "I just wanted my brother to hear me say it." Steve froze. The studio froze. Every light seemed to dim at once. 3 days before the taping, Marcus had written to the show's producers. His younger brother Elijah had been diagnosed with a terminal heart condition. The doctors had given him months, maybe weeks. But Elijah loved Family Feud. It was their ritual every Sunday night growing up. Marcus wanted one thing: to play together on stage before time ran out. The producers made it happen. They didn't tell Steve. Back on stage, Steve's instincts kicked in. The human part, not the performer. He put down his cue cards. The crew panicked silently behind the cameras. Producers gestured to keep the show moving. But Steve turned off his earpiece. He wasn't listening to anyone else now. He walked toward Elijah and Marcus. The music stopped. The crowd didn't dare breathe. Steve's voice, softer than ever, asked, "You mean this was your wish, man?" Elijah nodded, tears glistening but refusing to fall. Marcus was already breaking. "My brother wanted one last laugh," he said, "and it had to be with you, Mr. Harvey." Steve blinked hard. His jaw clenched. Then, without hesitation, he took off his signature beige jacket, the one fans recognized from 100 episodes, and wrapped it gently around Elijah's shoulders. "You got my jacket now," he said. "That means you family, man. Forever." Steve stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. No one expected what would happen next. The game was forgotten. The scoreboard meaningless. Steve turned to the audience. "Y'all, sometimes we come in here to laugh. And sometimes God sends us a reminder why laughter even matters." He kneeled next to Elijah's podium, his hand resting over the boy's trembling one. "Tell me something," Steve said. "What keeps you strong?" Elijah smiled through his pain. "My brother. And you. You make people laugh even when they're hurting. That's medicine too." The audience broke. You could hear sniffles, see tissue boxes being passed around. Cameras rolled, but Steve didn't care. He turned to Marcus. "You're doing something right, man. You love him out loud. That's rare." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. After the break, Steve refused to continue the competition. "We're not playing another round," he told the director. "We're doing something better." He invited the two brothers to center stage. He turned the show's lights down low. "Let's do a final round," Steve said. "But this time, the question's not on a card. It's in your heart." He looked at Elijah. "What's one thing you'd tell your brother if you had just one more minute?" Elijah inhaled sharply, his voice trembling. "I'd tell him not to waste time waiting to be proud of himself. I'd tell him he already made me proud." The room fell apart. Even the cameraman lowered his lens. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. As the applause softened, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded letter. He handed it to Steve. "This is for you," he said. Steve hesitated. "What's this, man?" "My thank you note, in case I don't get to say it later." Steve unfolded the letter. It was written in blue ink, shaky but strong. "Dear Mr. Harvey, you made me laugh when my heart couldn't keep up. You reminded me that joy is still alive. Don't ever stop. Elijah. Steve couldn't finish reading it out loud. His voice cracked mid-sentence. He turned away, wiped his face, and whispered, "I can't, man. I can't even read this." Then the audience rose. They clapped, not for a game won, but for a life honored. In the middle of that thunderous applause, Steve raised his microphone again, not to speak, but to let Elijah's laughter echo one more time over the speakers. He lifted the beige jacket from Elijah's shoulders and held it to his chest. "This ain't just fabric," he said. "This is a promise that every time somebody laughs here, you're part of it." The band began to play softly. The brothers embraced, and the whole crowd followed suit. Strangers hugging strangers, unity through grief. Months later, Elijah passed away peacefully with the jacket still folded at the foot of his hospital bed. His family sent it back to Steve, along with a note. He said, "You made him believe heaven has laughter." Steve framed that letter. He hung it in his dressing room behind the mirror where he prays before every show. And sometimes, when the audience goes quiet, when a joke lands too close to pain, he touches that frame and whispers, "Still laughing with you, buddy." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The cameras had long stopped rolling, but the air backstage still trembled with the kind of silence that only follows something sacred. Crew members whispered instead of talking. One of the lighting technicians quietly wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. Even the laughter that usually filled the corridors of Family Feud was gone, replaced by the hum of something deeper. Steve Harvey walked alone down the narrow hallway toward his dressing room. His beige jacket, the one he had given to Elijah, was gone, and it felt as if he had left a part of himself on that stage. The applause still echoed in his head, but so did the boy's trembling voice, "Don't ever stop." Inside the dressing room, the lights buzzed softly. The mirror reflected a man who looked different now, still smiling, still polished, but changed. He sat down heavily, elbows on knees, hands clasped. He stared at his reflection, trying to understand what had just happened. For decades, he had stood on stages around the world. He had told jokes in smoke-filled comedy clubs, hosted television shows watched by millions, comforted strangers through laughter. But tonight had rewritten everything he thought he knew about purpose. He whispered to himself, "God, I see what you did there." A quiet knock came at the door. It was Marcus. His eyes were red, but there was a strength in his voice now that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to stop the show. You didn't have to do any of that." Steve stood up slowly and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Yes, I did," he said. "Sometimes you stop the world for the right reason. Sometimes you stop it to remind folks what love looks like." Marcus nodded. He reached into his pocket and handed Steve something, a small folded note, torn from the same notebook as Elijah's first letter. It read, he said, "If you ever feel tired, remember that laughter keeps people alive, even when their hearts can't keep up." Steve read it twice, then pressed it gently to his chest. His eyes glistened, but this time he didn't hide it. After Marcus left, Steve sat in silence for a long time. He thought about his own struggles, about the times he'd been broke, sleeping in his car, wondering if his dream had expired. He thought about the day someone told him laughter was a waste of talent. And now, a boy whose heart was failing had called laughter medicine. That word wouldn't leave him. Medicine. Later that night, he called his wife, Marjorie. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Baby," he said, "something happened tonight. It wasn't a show. It was a reminder. That boy, he gave me more than I gave him." Marjorie was silent on the other end. Then she said softly, "That's what you do, Steve. You think you're telling jokes, but you're healing people." The next morning, Steve walked back onto the empty Family Feud set before anyone else arrived. The lights were still dim, the podiums still standing exactly where they'd left them. He placed his hand on the same spot where Elijah had pressed the buzzer. "Family," he whispered. "You were right, kid." He closed his eyes and said a short prayer, not for ratings, not for fame, but for strength to carry the weight of what that young man had given him. Weeks later, the story of that episode spread quietly through social media. Viewers shared clips, crying, laughing, remembering the moment Steve gave his jacket away. But what most people didn't know was that behind the scenes, Steve had started something new. He founded a small foundation in Elijah's name, the Still Laughing Project. Its mission was simple: to bring joy to children in hospitals, to fund heart treatments for families who couldn't afford them, and to send comedians to places where laughter was rare. During the first visit, Steve personally showed up. He walked into a pediatric ward carrying boxes of games, microphones, and, yes, a few of his beige jackets. The kids shouted his name, their laughter bouncing off the walls. And for the first time in years, Steve didn't feel like a performer. He felt like a vessel. He kneeled beside a little girl wearing a heart monitor and asked, "You ever watch Family Feud?" She nodded. "My mom says you funny," she said, smiling weakly. Steve laughed softly. "Your mom's right, but don't tell her I said that." The room filled with giggles. As he left, one of the nurses handed him a handmade card. Inside were colorful crayon letters. "Thank you for making the sad room smile." That night, Steve went home, placed that card next to Elijah's framed letter, and sat in silence. He realized that fame, trophies, or jokes didn't define his life. These moments did. The moments when laughter was the bridge between pain and peace. Months later, during a new taping of Family Feud, Steve walked on stage holding a small pin on his lapel, a golden heart with the initials EW etched into it. Most viewers didn't notice it, but he knew. It was his silent tribute. Halfway through that episode, during a break, a young contestant nervously told him, "My little brother's in the hospital. He watches you every day." Steve's eyes softened. "Tell him I said, keep laughing. That's the secret." And as the cameras rolled again, he turned to the crowd and said something unscripted, something raw. You never know what people are fighting through. So if you can make somebody laugh just once, you already did something holy. The audience erupted in applause, but Steve didn't hear it the same way anymore. Every clap was a heartbeat. Every cheer was a breath. Every laugh was Elijah's laughter, echoing across time, proving that kindness doesn't end when the credits roll. When the show ended that night, Steve looked up at the stage lights and whispered, "Still laughing with you, buddy. Always." And in that quiet moment, when no cameras were watching and no crowd was cheering, Steve Harvey smiled. Not as a celebrity, not as a comedian, but as a man who had finally understood what his laughter was meant for.